We're holding towards the end of the series, the challenges, the struggles, the trials of the 21st century. Tonight's topic is about Torah and modern scientific knowledge. I may divide this into several parts. This is a very big topic, and the reason I decided to speak about it is because, unfortunately, there are a lot of people today, especially Jews, who perceive a sort of conflict. It appears to them that there's some sort of conflict between Torah values and science, modern science especially. There's a lot of scientific advances today, and it's definitely something for us to admire, the tremendous progress that has been made. Nobody denies the tremendous amount of knowledge that humanity has access to today that we did not have years ago. But all this knowledge, as good as it may be and as useful as it is, sometimes presents a threat to established values from the past, to Torah values, to that which was common knowledge to all of us, to that which was traditionally accepted by our forefathers. And some, I say some, not all, seem to have a difficulty with this. They seem like they have a need somehow to conform to these values, the values of science, which sometimes, of course, is in opposition to Torah values. And this is definitely a topic that has been dealt with recently in various forms, and there needs to be more discussion about this in order to clarify the pitfalls of believing certain beliefs, of having the wrong approach towards this topic. It's very important that we have the right approach and we look at things from the right perspective. Otherwise, this could lead to tremendous confusion. So the idea of this lecture is to help clarify this area, this topic, so that there's less confusion and less doubts about what the Torah says and what science says. And in reality, there should be no conflict. Something that is a scientific fact is usually pretty much in agreement with the Torah. It just may be our problem of how we interpret these facts or how we look at them. So as I said, there may be a need for several lectures to cover all the points that I want to get across. But it's important as we begin to talk about this very, very relevant topic is to keep in mind what I've said before, that B'Acharit HaYamim, in the end of days, as I've mentioned in the lecture perhaps on atheism or on faith or on immorality, on all these challenges of the 21st century, the challenge will be greater now than it was in the past. So we need to keep in mind that the challenges that we are facing today are coming from various directions, not just from science. It's coming at us from various directions, and it does threaten one's emunah, one's faith in God. One of those threats happens to be scientific theory. I intentionally use the word theory because I just said that scientific fact would not really pose a problem, but there's a lot of scientific theory out there, and that's where the problems begin. Now, it is as a result of the tremendous amount of knowledge that is out there that is causing some people to have doubts. These doubts are not only related to the Torah, to the stories in the Torah, to the mitzvot in the Torah, to the information provided to us in the Torah, but also to our masoret, to our heritage, to what the Talmud writes, to what the rabbis have said. So there's a lot of doubts being formed in people's minds as a result of all this vast amount of information that's out there. And it should have been the exact opposite. It should have been that science would increase our understanding of creation. As many commentaries who discuss knowledge of science point out that if anything, if one is more knowledgeable in the sciences, this would help him. This will be a springboard in helping him to become more observant, in realizing the beauty and harmony in creation. So if anything, all this knowledge should have been helpful. And by the way, many scientists, Jewish scientists, have done teshuvah, have come back. Their faith has become stronger as a result of them analyzing, as an example, the cell under a microscope, powerful microscope. So in other words, they have come very, very close to observing, I guess, the greatness or the beauty of creation with their scientific tools. So this definitely demonstrates that, if anything, science can be very, very helpful. The Rambam Maimonides also says that our love for God is proportional to our knowledge. So the more we are knowledgeable of creation, the more we know, as much as there is to know, the more we should be admiring all of this creation. And our love for God would increase. That doesn't seem to be happening. And that's part of the problem here. It should. In other words, science should not in any way hamper our connection to God. If anything, it should strengthen it. So what is missing here? What's going on here? Why are people really full of doubts? Why do they perceive a conflict? Why is it that some people are simply questioning what was once accepted as a truth, as a Torah truth? All of a sudden they're having doubts and they're beginning to question that which was not questionable in the past. Anyway, I have a secret to tell you. It's not such a secret, but it's something that people are not aware of. Knowledge is powerful, but it also is important for us to know where that knowledge comes from. The knowledge in itself could be very useful. Knowledge is knowledge. And if it's true, then it should be something that we should readily accept. Right? But the problem lies in that we don't always know where this knowledge is coming from. And that makes a world of a difference. Where is this knowledge coming from? Where is the fountain or the source of this knowledge? It's not the knowledge in itself. I don't know how many of you have been to Mexico or to other countries where they don't advise you to drink from the faucet, the water from the faucet. Either you boil that water or you buy drinking water. Today many people are buying drinking water, even in the United States, even though the water here in Los Angeles is very clean. Very clean. It's filtered. And the processes that it goes through, it very much eliminates all the bacteria and all the impurities. But water in a country where it did not go through that kind of process is definitely not healthy. I think that's understood. People get diarrhea and all kinds of diseases as a result of drinking that water. Even though, I must admit, that I have seen, and every time I'm there, I see a lot of people just drinking that water because they're so used to it, it doesn't affect them anymore. But for those of us who are more careful with drinking clean water, we would definitely feel within a couple of hours that this water is not healthy water. I use this as an example, but the Kabbalah explains pretty much the same idea when it comes to da'at, knowledge. What's knowledge? What's da'at? There's something called chokhmah, which is wisdom, knowing certain facts. Da'at is the highest form of knowledge. Da'at, the Kabbalah explains, is connected to a source, a higher source in the upper world. True da'at is not knowledge. It's da'at, meaning that it's coming from the source. It is the highest form of knowledge. It's not just plain wisdom. And at that level, at the level of the source, that da'at is connected to emunah, to faith. And as I've explained in other lectures, at some point, our minds stop rationalizing, stop thinking, stop understanding, and we have to believe. And that is the connection between the higher source, the upper source of Da'at, to that which is called Emunah. So on that level, Da'at is directly connected to Emunah. On the other hand, there is also Da'at, knowledge, which has a different faucet, if we can say so. And that faucet is from the Sitra Hara, is from the impure forces. So there is Da'at, there is a higher form of Da'at, of knowledge, that is drawing its knowledge through this faucet that is unfiltered. I'm using that example of unfiltered water, so we can understand the difference between the two. That information that is coming down through that pipeline is in opposition. It's completely different than the information that's coming down from the Emunah, from the Da'at that's connected to Emunah. The two have a source, an upper source in the upper world, but the two are very different. The two are actually opposed to each other. What one Da'at is supposed to represent, the other one is against. For those of you who are more interested to know a little bit more about this Da'at that is unfiltered, it is the same shoresh, the Kabbalah explains, the same root as Amalek. For those of you who have heard perhaps the lecture on Amalek, the danger that Amalek poses to the Jewish mission, it has to do with the fact that the information that's coming down through that pipeline is completely contrary and against the information that's coming down from the Da'at which is connected to Emunah. So, what do we have so far? We have two opposing Da'at. Da'at is knowledge. Yes, but it all depends where you're getting it from. Are you getting it from a clean, refined source? Or are you getting it from the Sitra Hara, from the impure forces, from the other side? Okay, so far, so good. What do we know so far? That there's two kinds of Da'at. And the two of them are opposed to each other. And that already makes things difficult, because it's knowledge. Knowledge is powerful. Knowledge supposedly is factual. Knowledge supposedly is convincing. Yeah, but you didn't necessarily look into where this knowledge is coming from. It can make a world of a difference. Depends from which faucet you're getting it. Okay. But at least it's knowledge, you may say. Yeah. But it's not the same. One will lead you in one direction, and one will lead you in a totally different direction. One will give you more clarity and enable you to connect with God, and one will not. But it's knowledge. Yes, it's knowledge, but what you will get from it, what you will achieve with it, will be something completely different than what you would achieve with the other faucet. The faucet that is getting its water, that is getting its Da'at from Emunah. Okay. What makes things more complicated is that in this world, there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of unknowns. Nothing is perfectly clear. The word in Hebrew, olam, means that it's concealed, from the word alum or ne'elam. In other words, there's a lot that we don't know. A lot is concealed. As the Kabbalah explains, there's more water in the ocean. There's more water on this planet than there is Earth. 70% of the globe is water. Why is there more water than Earth? Did you ever think about that? The Kabbalah gets into those kinds of questions. Water conceals. There's more hidden than there is revealed. Well, if there's more hidden than there is revealed, it makes it more difficult to know with certainty the truth. It makes it more complicated to figure out, what is true from what is not true. Not everything is clear, not everything is revealed. To make matters worse, we are told that B'acharit Hayamim, in the end of days, there will be a hester, there will be a double concealment of all the divine knowledge. I guess that's a good word for it, divine knowledge. There will be a double concealment, a hester betoch hester. As one rabbi said, it will be so difficult to ascertain the truth and to be comfortable with it, like to climb up a wall without a ladder, just with your bare hands. Flat surface. So we are living in this time. And you're wondering why people are having these doubts. Well, this sheds a little bit of light as to why people can easily wander off. This generation is going to have it more difficult than the past because of the many challenges. One of them happens to be science. One of them happens to be this fountain of knowledge that is not necessarily coming from the right source where we want it to come from, where we can trust it 100%. Can you trust it 100%, this fountain of knowledge? No. But it's knowledge, yeah. But it's unrefined. It's not filtered. And it's dangerous. It could be valuable, sure. I think all of you love it when you get on a plane and you're able to get to your destination in a couple of hours instead of days or weeks or months. I mean, there's a lot of technology that is so useful and benefits all of mankind. Yeah, but all of that knowledge, where is it coming from? That's what we need to know. It's very, very important, because even though it could be useful in some ways, in some areas it could be dangerous. And the one area where it causes many problems is in the area of faith. Not necessarily the area of medicine, not necessarily in the area of technology, but in the area of faith. For some reason, we don't know it yet, but for some reason, there's a conflict here. All I did was to explain to you the root of the conflict. There is a little bit of a conflict, because at the root, at the source of where this knowledge is coming down from, is Amalek. The berez, the faucet of where all this knowledge is coming down from, is not necessarily from the fountain that you want to drink. The knowledge about faith, knowledge about God. And that is where people get confused, is because this knowledge encompasses everything. Or at least it tries to. It tries to dictate to you what you should believe and what you should not believe. Wait a minute. Why don't you just stay out of religion and stick to technology? That would be nice if they could do that. But it's a fountain of knowledge that everybody wants to connect to. And a lot of people are drinking from this knowledge, not realizing where it's coming from. And living in this generation makes it even more difficult. All I did right now is give you a little bit of an introduction of what the problems are and where it begins. What we can do about it, however, is a little bit more complicated. I say complicated because in order to be able to confront it properly, one has to really, really be knowledgeable in Torah. Without having a good foundation of Torah, there's a void. And whenever there's a void, something is going to fill that void. We don't want that void to be filled with all that information that is out there from a different source. Once you fill the void with proper information, with the right values, with water that's coming down from the right source, then hopefully that will not allow anything else extraneous to come in. So I say it's complicated because not everybody has filled this void. People are not necessarily studying enough Torah. People are not necessarily dealing with all the questions that come up. People do not necessarily have teachers to turn to ask questions and to clarify their doubts. And in Pesach we deal with this. In the Haggadah of Pesach, there's 4 kinds of children. One of them is Sheno Yodea Lishol. He doesn't even know how to ask questions. Could you imagine somebody not asking questions and living his entire life in doubt? You have a doubt, you have a question, ask it. Ask it to the right authorities that are competent, that know to deal with the question. Today, it's more complicated because not everyone who teaches has the answers, or can provide the answers to somebody who poses the question, what do you think about the Big Bang? Well, what's that? Somebody who didn't study science. Or what do you have to say about the dinosaurs? Or what do you have to say about evolution? It's tricky. It can be more complicated. But it's definitely a lot more helpful if that void is already full of knowledge from a good source that hopefully will be able to defend itself. Without any knowledge, a person is almost without any defense, and he just assimilates and just absorbs whatever it is that they give him. So what has to be our approach? What is it? How do we begin by dealing with this apparent conflict? First, one has to know the difference between science and Torah. What is the difference between science, truth, and Torah, truth? One way of explaining it is as follows. Science consists of man-made theories, which explain experimental and observational facts. Right? That's what science does. Torah is based on revelation and prophecy. What does that tell you? The two are very, very different. They're not the same. They're based on different principles. So, because they're so different, they follow different guidelines. And it's important to understand that, because if we don't understand the proper guidelines or the proper approach on how to learn the Chumash, how to learn the Torah, how to learn the Gemara, how to learn a Midrash even, then it would make it more difficult for us. We have to know what those guidelines are. There's a certain respect that we have for the rabbis, for our teachers. If that respect is lacking, it's already a failure. The learning will not work out. The acquisition of knowledge from that source will not happen. There's certain conditions that need to be met, just like with science. Science claims that you have to follow certain parameters if you want to be able to prove something. And if you don't follow them, then it's not scientific. Well, the same thing is with the Torah. If you don't follow certain parameters, certain guidelines on how to acquire this knowledge of Torah, then it will not work. One of those happens to be respect. The proper respect for that knowledge, for those who gave us that knowledge, for those who taught us, for the bearers of that knowledge. That is a very important condition. One of the questions that is asked is, why is the Torah so vague? You know, it would have been nice if the Torah could be clearer, if we could have more information, if things would be more apparent. You know, right now, if you learn the Chumash and you read about the creation, Bereshit, bara Elokim et hashamayim, that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth and so forth, there's not a lot of information there as how did it happen. Some people have even this idea that perhaps every day of creation lasted more than 24 hours. You are allowed to think that way because there are opinions who hold that. It could be that before man came to the scene, before time was created, God's clock works different. A day is longer. So it's not a problem of thinking that way. There are some who hold that it could be that those days lasted longer. But you have to be careful not to be carried away by that. So getting back to our question, why didn't God make it clearer so there should not be any doubts, so that it should not be subject to interpretation and that there should be so many opinions about it? So the simple answer to that is free will. In order to enable free will, in order for a human being to have true free will, things cannot be too obvious, things cannot be too clear. there has to be some room for mistake, some room for doubt. Otherwise, it would not be free will. If everything was clear, everything was provable scientifically, then where's the free will? So that's the simple answer. The rabbis tell us, if people want to make a mistake, if people choose to believe a certain thing, along the path man chooses to go, he is led. They won't stop him necessarily. You don't want to get your information from reliable sources. You want to think on your own, believing that you can figure this out on your own, or you want to trust this other source that is not filtered with your information about creation. They won't stop you. They'll let you err. They'll let you go along the path you choose to. That's all free will. Then there is, of course, another explanation given that had all this information about creation been given to us in the Torah 2,000-3,000 years ago, you think people then would have understood it? All the physics that we have today, all the advancement in technology, all the information that we have today would not have been understood by people who would have been reading the Torah 2,000-3,000 years ago. So what good would it have been to write all that information, to make that available back then? But I prefer the explanation of Rav Kook, of blessed memory. And I'm going to say it in English. The Torah was vague in many areas and spoke in hints and parables. The key point is the knowledge of God which can be derived in this manner. In other words, Hashem intentionally wrote the Torah in such a way that the knowledge that we can derive from it will be derived in a certain way. And that certain way is more clarified in the Gemara. There are various rules that the rabbis follow on how to derive information. In looking at a certain word, the way it is spelled, and so forth. There are many, many rules in the oral law that help us derive that information. So the vagueness of the Torah is intentional to enable us to derive all that information in this manner. Hashem wanted it. In other words, had things been written in a very clear fashion, we would not be able to derive all the information that we can derive. Hashem wants us to derive the information from the Torah, the halacha from the Torah, in a certain way. And because of that, he leaves it in a certain, vagueness for future interpretation based or according to certain rules. I'm going to quote to you a little bit more of what he says. He says as follows: the essence of the Torah is in its content. And when a challenge arises which causes difficulty with the simple interpretation of the words of the Torah, it forces us to arise and search the inner essence of the Torah. So the fact that certain things are not so clear, it forces us to search the essence, the inner essence of the Torah. So as a result of this vagueness, this compels us, this forces us to learn or to search for the information that otherwise is not so clear. He continues on to say, it is man's duty to uplift his labor from its lowly state. Therefore, scientific and technological development is a step in the process of human redemption. In other words, that is exactly what should have happened with all the advancements in the scientific field, that it should have been a step in the process of human redemption. Why hasn't it happened? The sterility which is common in modern research is a consequence of preoccupation with science per se, without any association with sacred matters. In other words, the world is more involved in just the science per se, without associating it with sacred matters. In other words, what is the ultimate goal of all this? It's similar to those who are trying to figure out how the world was created, but not why. That should also be something that should preoccupy scientists, but that's not something that they're preoccupied. They don't want to know that. They care more about how things happen, not why. I want to quote to you what Mark Twain says. What do we do in order to avoid being trapped in this trap of being unfortunately exposed to all of these waters coming from the wrong source? Mark Twain said as follows: people worry about the parts of the scriptures they don't understand. The parts that bother me the most are the ones I do understand. In other words, there's a lot of information in the Torah that is very clear, that is very understandable by everyone. That should be where our efforts should go. That should be what we should emphasize. We should not be detracted by those things that we don't understand. That is where our focus needs to be. But people are distracted. People get distracted by all kinds of things, and they don't focus on what's really important. My favorite way, however, of dealing with all the questions that arise today is as follows. One of the tricks, or one of the excuses the evolutionists used to justify why there has not been found yet a missing link. You understand what I mean by missing link? Between the transitional species, is they claim that we need more time. We need millions of years to see this happening. So if you were to wait around a long time, you would eventually see it. Just because you don't see it now doesn't mean that it can't be. One of these days you'll see it. I like to borrow, if I may, their excuse and apply it to the Torah as well. If you don't have an understanding, if you don't have the proper understanding of how the Torah says what it says in the face of newly scientific discoveries, wait. Maybe one of these days science will provide you the answer. Just because they don't know it today doesn't mean one of these days they won't know it, right? We didn't just stop making discoveries. One of these days there'll be more discoveries. One of these days, perhaps science will give you the answer. I'd like to use this, for example, to explain one of the puzzles that many people have expressed in the Torah. That the Torah says that there are 4 species that are not kosher. One of them because it has split hoofs, but doesn't chew its cud. And 3 of them because they chew their cud, but they don't have split hoofs. Remember this?
The pig.
Right? The pig has split hooves, doesn't chew its cud. And then you have the camel and the rabbit or the hare and the badger, the rock badger, who somehow they chew their cud, but they don't have split hooves. And the question that people are raising today, Jews and non-Jews, is, wait a minute, the rock badger, the connie, the rabbit, they don't chew their cud. The camel, okay, it chews its cud and doesn't have split hooves. But what about these other ones? They don't seem to be chewing their cud. What do you say about that? You see how these kind of questions present difficulties, doubts, questions in people's mind? Oh yeah, that's a good point. I'm not going to get into all the possible explanations of that right now, but we have to look at it properly. My first question to those who raise this question is, but wait a minute, don't you think that the rabbis were aware of this? You could easily tell that these animals, like the rabbit or the rock badger, they don't chew their cud in the same way, at least, as a giraffe does or as a camel does. It's pretty obvious. They weren't troubled by this question. The experts in the past weren't troubled. Why all of a sudden is everybody troubled by this? Maybe they knew something we don't know. But the real answer to this is that we may not know today what it means to chew cud. Maybe we will know soon. Maybe in a couple more years they'll discover, oh, by the way, because of the type of stomach that this animal has, it is equivalent to chewing its cud. In other words, the food, the way it goes through the system, perhaps is equivalent to chewing its cud. Or some other way. I'm not going to get into all the ways. There are various scientific explanations that perhaps what could be the equivalent of chewing one's cud. There's other, I'm not going to get into all of them right now. The main point I want to get across is, even if we don't know, so what? Does that mean we will never know? Maybe one of these days we will know. Science, has proven that many things it thought it knew, it made a mistake. And it discovered things that it didn't know from before. So maybe one of these days they'll discover it. In the meantime, I can live with the rest of it, with what I do know, what is incumbent among me, like Mark Twain says, with the things that are clear to me. That should not take away from just because there's certain things that I don't understand. The problem is that people immediately jump to conclusions, say, oh, you see, it's a mistake. It can't be divine. How could Moses write something like this? How could the rabbis even claim that this is proof that the Torah is divine? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to you now, but maybe it will a year or two from now. Be patient. Don't let that bother you. Why does it bother you so much? Perhaps you're looking for trouble. Perhaps you're looking for those things that don't make sense. Right? If you don't look for trouble, there are many ways that one can explain these kinds of questions, or these kinds of mitzvot, commandments, that are not so clear. There are various ways. You know where it all begins, where it all really matters? It begins with the belief in God. If that is granted, if that is something that is assumed, then all other problems are non-existent or minor. It begins with that. Do you believe in God? Do you believe that God created the world? Then you will hopefully believe that God can perform miracles, right? Then you will believe that what He said in the Torah, assuming that you believe that the Torah was dictated by God, is true. Therefore, the first step in the foundation of all foundations is to understand that there is a supreme being who created the world. If we don't get to that point, we can't go on. And it's important that we establish this when a child is young. As the rabbis tell us, if you teach a child to what is this compared to applying ink on fresh paper, not on erased paper, old paper. A person who is already in his 30s, 40s, 50s has already acquired all kinds of information. To try to erase what he has learned and to start from scratch is very difficult. It's not easy. You want to introduce what you can when he's young. The best way to understand it is with a mortgage loan. If you want to apply for a second, you're going to have to pay a higher interest rate, right? Why? Because they'll tell you whoever's in first position is in a better position in case they have to take over the house, right? In case you default on the loan. Whoever is in first position is always in a stronger position. Whoever is in this first position in this child's head will always have a better chance. If the child or the adult was already impressed or absorbed information from the other faucet for many, many years, it will be more difficult. So you want to make sure that you get it to him early on. Now, what happens if you don't? Chas v'shalom. So the rabbis tell us, in Pirkei Avot as well, Chachamim yizaru b'divrechem. I'm going to read it to you in English. The rabbis are warned to be very, very careful with what you teach. Sages, be careful with your words. You may incur the penalty of exile and be banished to a place of evil waters. What's evil waters? Heresy. And the disciples who follow after you will drink and die, and as a result, the heavenly name will be profaned. You see what could happen? God forbid, if the wrong information is taught, if any doubts are left lingering in the student's mind, he will drink from the evil waters. He will drink from the heresy that's out there in the street. Why should he? Because if you don't say things properly, there could be room for misunderstanding. If you don't clarify things just in the right way, he may get the wrong idea. So in teaching, in communicating the truths of the Torah, the teachers have to be very, very careful. Otherwise, this does have the potential of weakening a Jew's connection to his faith. And therefore, it should not be taken lightly. When you want to remove a wall, a partition in your house, can you just do it? Use a hammer, knock it down. You want to make the kitchen bigger. Sounds simple, right? When can you not do this?
Wall bearing.
If it's a
Wall bearing.
A wall bearing. What's a wall bearing?
Support. Foundation.
It's a wall that is supporting the whole house. It's not just a dividing wall, right? It supports the whole house. You can't just if you take it down, you take down the whole house. So these kinds of issues, these kinds of questions is very, very essential, very important. It's critical. We can't just make like, okay, it's okay if he hears other opinions too. Yes, but where are all these opinions coming from? Maybe they're heretical, and they have the potential of damaging this whole edifice, the emunah. So we can't take it lightly. So therefore, it's important to start off with the foundation early on, with the assumption that there is a creator to the world, that our masoret, our heritage, is accurate, it was handed down properly. Otherwise, if that does not happen, there's always room for doubt, there's always room, Chas v'shalom, God forbid, for doubts in our faith and for confusion, which is, by the way, what Amalek wants. The power of Amalek is to cool others' faith, to weaken our connection to God. What else can be done to avoid this trap? What can we do in order that, God forbid, we should not fall into this trap of making all these mistakes that others have made? One of the most powerful tools at our disposal is something that the rabbis advise us strongly of, is a selech harav. Is find yourself a teacher. Make yourself a teacher. Why is that so important? Because we don't know it all, number one. Right? What else? Besides we don't know it all, what benefit will a teacher provide? Guidance, in halakha and hashkafa, of course, in how to do things properly, how to have the right perspective. But people forget the main point of a selech harav. It's not just for the information that somebody more knowledgeable can provide us. A selech harav is submissiveness. It's humbleness. There's somebody that knows better, knows more, and I submit myself to him. Hopefully I will do what he says. That is a very important quality. Especially for those who are knowledgeable and learned it already. If one is very knowledgeable and learned it already, there's a danger that he will become conceited, that he will become arrogant. Did I pronounce it right?
Conceited.
Conceited? I always forget. All right. Conceited. There's always a danger that he will think he knows it all. Knowledgeable. He's got a PhD, 2 PhDs. Yes, it's natural. It's completely natural and normal for a person to become conceited if he acquired a lot of knowledge. And what's the problem with that? So he's conceited. The problem with that is that we have a tradition that the Torah does not percolate, maybe that's a good word, does not enter the individual unless he's humble. If he's not humble, the chances for the Torah being absorbed in him are very, very small. Humbleness comes from Kedusha, from holiness. If one sanctifies himself, that could bring him to humbleness. If he's not holy, if he's not, does not sanctify himself in the way he conducts himself in life, he will not necessarily be humble. It's a gradual stepping up, spiritual growth that needs to happen with an individual in order for him to become closer and closer to Hashem, and at the same time realize how small he really is. And that understanding is, of course, something that can only come about with humbleness. Humbleness meaning that he realizes that there's only so much he could know. There's only so much that he's capable of knowing on his own. And without the teacher giving him guidance, he may make a mistake. We're only human. We're not perfect. Some people just forget that. They don't realize you can make a mistake. But he's a scientist. Yes, but scientists have made many mistakes. Humbleness, just a little bit of humbleness can make a world of a difference. Where do we learn this from? From Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu, you know who Avraham Avinu was? He went through many trials, right? Many challenges. Yeah. What was his biggest challenge? You want to guess? What?
Or the Akedah.
The Akedah, right? Bringing his only son, his dear son Isaac, thinking that he was going to sacrifice him. You know, if you read through the whole episode of the Akedah, you will find that it's not so much that. He takes his son, no problem. He doesn't hesitate even. You know what's the real sacrifice? You know what the real challenge from Avraham Avinu was? To sacrifice his intellect. This was so illogical, what he was doing. It was against his principles of what he preached to all of humanity back then. No human sacrifices. It's ridiculous what you're doing, he told everybody. And here he's going against his own principles, against what he taught. And it's going against the promise God made him. This will be your son, right? All your descendants will come through him. This is a contradiction to everything he was told and everything he believed. So he said to sacrifice his intellect, to not allow his intellect to get in the way, that is the most admirable feat here. That is why Avraham Avinu was such a great man. Not just because of his willingness to do everything that God tells him. It's more than that. It's that submissiveness. It's the ability to sacrifice one's intellect. Who's willing to do that? No. The intellect is God. Intellect rules. It's our knowledge that knows everything. Who told you that you know everything? What do you mean? There's a lot we don't know. But if one is not humble, how is he going to get there? So, aseh lecharav, make yourself a rabbi. Make yourself a teacher. Turn to someone who may know more. Clarify your doubts. Don't assume you know everything. Assume that perhaps you're mistaken. And always be prepared to change your mind, to learn more. And even if it requires to sacrifice our intellect, in other words, to give up our old beliefs. So what? We're interested in the truth. Just want to finish up with what Yeshayahu Navi says. Yeshayahu the prophet. If you ever wonder how our great leaders, whether it was Abraham or later Moshe Rabbeinu, how they were able to deal with all the difficulties they faced and all the questions that they for sure had too. Not doubts, questions. They had no doubts, but they had questions. Everybody had questions, but some people were able to resolve them as a result of their strong faith in God. But what did it? What ultimately convinced them not to question God too much? What Yeshayahu Navi says. Ki lo machshavotay machshavotechem. I'm going to read it in English. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways, says Hashem. We can't figure Hashem out. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. He does things differently than us. Don't therefore expect to ever be able to figure him out 100%. That's not your job. And the Torah too has tremendous depth to it. You're not expected to figure it all out. Many layers to it. There is a mystical layer to it, which science is not aware of. That which is mystical, mysticism. They see the physical reality. They don't see the mystic layer. You mean there's another layer? underneath the atom, besides the protons, besides the neutrons, besides the neutrino, besides the electrons? You mean there's something else? Yes. In Switzerland, they're trying to figure that one out right now. And they're calling it the God particle. Finally, they're giving it the name God particle. So, we're progress, huh? You mean there's something else? Yes, there's something else. If you learn Kabbalah, you see what that something else is. Who learns Kabbalah? Right now, I mean, a lot of people think they're learning Kabbalah, but that's not real deep Kabbalah. Life is short. We don't have that much time to learn everything there is. But we have to realize, at the very least, that there's a lot more we don't know than we do know. And whatever it is that we can ask our teacher, our rabbi, we should ask. So that we get some answers to our questions, so that emunah, chas v'shalom, God forbid, should not become weaker. That we should always stay focused on our mission, not get distracted by all these distractions that abound. And today, the scientific world that we live in, the technology that is all over us, is really just confusing everybody. You know, wow, they must know the truth. No, they have knowledge, but don't forget where that knowledge is coming from. It's coming from a different faucet. It's not filtered. And it could pose a big problem when it comes to the area of faith. Get your knowledge from the right source. And if you still have any questions, just remember that our minds are limited. Our physical minds are limited. We can't know everything there is to know. We can't therefore have all the answers that we would like to all our questions. There was one guy who once had many, many questions to his rabbi. The rabbi, I really have a lot of questions about God. So he says, you want the answers? He says, yes. Then you have to go upstairs. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Yeah. When we go upstairs, we'll find out the truth. In the meantime, we have a mission to accomplish. And if we want to be able to transmit all those values to the future generations, then we have to be proud of it. We have to be strong. We have to have some degree of clarity about it. Otherwise, if we are weak, what can we expect of our children? We have to be, therefore, very careful in how we look at the Torah truths, at the Torah values, and not allow, God forbid, that this other scientific knowledge should get in the way. That is a challenge for many people who are studying science, who are, being exposed to all of this knowledge. And how do we deal with this? Don't forget, humbleness. Realize that as great as we are, as knowledgeable we are, we're very, very small. And if you want to know how small, try to compare planet Earth to Jupiter. And then try to compare Jupiter to the smallest star, and to the smallest galaxy. And you will see a speck. And who are we in this Earth? Nothing. So, humbleness. Be humble a little bit and realize that there's so much we don't know about this mysterious world. But one thing we do know is that God created the world. That has to be a given. That has to be the assumption. Once we have that assumption, then it's easier to deal with everything else. One way of dealing with the big questions is that maybe we don't know today. One of these days we'll know. And if we don't know the answer, that's okay too. There's enough that I do understand that I can fulfill, that I can commit myself to. Why let this bother me? Just because the science is challenging me? Don't forget, that knowledge is coming from a different source, from a different faucet. Don't let that mislead you. And that's what people forget. They think that this is for sure the truth. This needs to be worshipped. This is a religion. These are facts, what they're claiming. And therefore, this is what you should pursue. That's Amalek. That's exactly what Amalek wants to accomplish. And unfortunately, a lot of Jews are falling into this trap of saying, in other words, maybe I need to follow them and accept what they tell me as being the truth. After all, they know better. Do they know better? Why do they know better? No, they have a PhD. So what? This is something that we gave our lives for. This is something we held so dearly for so many generations. Just because a few people come along and say that this is questionable, that this may not be true, we have to be very wary of that, because there is always a threat out there. The threat continuously exists, rabbis tell us, in every generation of there's something out there that wants to sever our ties from God. Don't let that happen. So we need to inform ourselves as much as possible with the values of Torah, and not allow that there should be a void there of ignorance, of not knowing anything, because then something will fill that void. we need to make sure, therefore, that that void is always filled with the truth of Torah and the truth, of course, of our Chachamim, of our sages, that were the bearers of this truth. This is, B'ezrat Hashem, what will enable us to stay continuously connected with the emet, with the truth.
Amen.
It's